The stars had always belonged to the. For 3,000 years, their empire had spread across the galaxy like a dark stain. 17 star systems bowed to their power. Hundreds of species had learned to fear the sight of their black warships cutting through the void. Commander Hose stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Fang, and watched the small blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness ahead. Earth, the humans called it Earth. Hose had read the reports about this species. They were soft creatures, no scales to protect their flesh, no claws to tear their enemies apart, no venom in their bite. They stood on two weak legs and had flat, dull teeth meant for chewing plants. By all measurements, they should have been easy prey. But something about the reports troubled him. The High Council had given him a simple mission: go to human space, study them, find their weaknesses, prepare for invasion. The Empire needed new worlds, new resources, and new slaves. Earth seemed perfect. Hose was 7 feet tall. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his 4 eyes could see in complete darkness. He had killed his first enemy at the age of 6 cycles. He had led armies across burning worlds. He feared nothing in the universe. But as he watched that blue planet grow larger on his screen, something cold moved through his chest. He did not know what it was. He ignored it. The first human ship arrived 3 days later. It was small compared to his warship. The humans called it the Horizon's Edge, and it carried their diplomatic team. Hose had expected them to tremble when they came aboard. He had expected fear in their eyes and shaking in their voices. Instead, a human male walked onto his bridge with a smile on his face. "Commander Hose," the human said, extending his hand in some kind of greeting gesture. "I'm Captain Danny Torres. Welcome to this part of the galaxy. We brought coffee." Hose stared at the small creature before him. Danny Torres was barely 6 feet tall. His skin was brown and smooth, completely unprotected. His eyes were small and forward-facing, like a prey animal. Yet he stood there smiling as if he had walked into a room full of friends instead of warriors who could tear him apart in seconds. "You do not fear us," Hose said. "It was not a question." Danny shrugged. "Should I? You haven't given me a reason to, yet." The other humans behind Danny laughed. They actually laughed aboard a warship. Hose felt that cold thing in his chest grow stronger. The negotiations were brief. The humans agreed to allow a small team of observers to live aboard one of their space stations. They said it was for cultural exchange. Hose knew it was an opportunity to study human weaknesses from the inside. The humans probably knew this too, but they did not seem to care. Lieutenant Al was chosen to lead the observation team. He was one of Hose's best warriors. His scales were black as space, and he had killed more enemies than he could count. With him went Sub-Commander Ra, a female warrior whose claws had ended the lives of rebel leaders across 3 systems. 4 elite scouts completed the team. "Find their weakness," Hose ordered before they departed. "Every species has one. Find it, and the invasion will be simple." Al pressed his clawed fist to his chest in salute. "It will be done, Commander." The journey to Shadow Station 7 took 2 days. The station floated at the edge of human territory, a joint outpost where humans and other alien species lived and worked together. It was large, home to nearly 1,000 beings. Most of them were human. When the shuttle docked, a small human female was waiting to greet them. She wore a simple uniform and had yellow hair cut short around her face. Her smile was wide and bright. "Welcome to Shadow Station 7, she said. "I'm Commander Marsh. We're so glad you're here." Al looked down at her. She was tiny. Her head barely reached his chest. He could break her neck with one hand without even trying. Yet she stood there looking up at him like he was an old friend come to visit. "You are the station commander," he said. "You lead this place." "That's me," replied. "Let me show you to your quarters. You've arrived at a great time. Recreation Week starts tomorrow." "Recreation Week?" Ra asked. "It's when we all take a break from work and have some fun together. Games, sports, entertainment, fun stuff. Started walking and they had no choice but to follow. Your timing is perfect. You'll get to see humanity at its most relaxed. Al did not know what to make of this. In the Empire, warriors did not take breaks. They trained, they fought, they conquered. The concept of an entire week devoted to something called fun was foreign to him. Their quarters were simple but comfortable. The humans had tried to accommodate needs, providing harder sleeping surfaces and adjusting the temperature. Al was reluctantly impressed by the attention to detail. That night, as the station settled into its sleep cycle, Al stood at the window of his room and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Commander Hose waited aboard the Endless Fang, expecting reports on human weaknesses. Al thought about what he had seen so far. The humans smiled too much. They laughed too easily. They showed no fear in the presence of obvious predators. Either they were very stupid or they were something else entirely. He thought about Marsh and her bright smile. He thought about Danny Torres offering coffee on a warship. He thought about the way the humans moved through their station with easy confidence, as if the universe held nothing that could truly hurt them. Tomorrow, Recreation Week would begin. Tomorrow, he would start to learn what humans did for fun. Al had conquered worlds. He had faced death 1,000 times. He had walked through fire and blood without flinching. But as he stood there in the darkness, watching the cold stars spin past, that strange cold feeling began to grow in his chest. It was something he had not felt in many years. It took him a long time to recognize it. It was the first small seed of fear. He did not sleep well that night. When the station's artificial sun began to rise, painting the corridors in warm yellow light, Al was already awake. He gathered his team and prepared to observe. He had no idea what was coming. The screaming woke Al from his restless sleep. He was on his feet in less than a second, his claws extended and ready to kill. His warrior instincts took over completely. Someone was being attacked. Someone was dying. The high-pitched sounds of terror echoed through the station corridors, and Al grabbed his plasma rifle and ran toward them. Ra joined him in the hallway, her scales raised in defensive ridges. The 4 scouts fell in behind them, weapons drawn. They moved as a unit, years of combat training guiding their steps. The screaming grew louder as they approached the source. Al burst through a large doorway and stopped so suddenly that Ra crashed into his back. The room was massive. It was some kind of recreational chamber, filled with platforms at different heights. Below the platforms, large pools of water sparkled under bright lights, and everywhere humans were screaming. But they were not being attacked. They were jumping. Al watched in frozen disbelief as a human ran to the edge of a platform high above the water. The human screamed, leaped into empty air, and plummeted down toward the pool below. The fall must have been at least 30 meters. The human hit the water with a tremendous splash and disappeared beneath the surface. Al waited for the body to float up. He waited for the blood to spread through the water. He waited for the other humans to begin mourning their dead companion. Instead, the human burst up from the water, laughing and pumping their fists in the air. The other humans cheered. "What is this?" Ra whispered. Her voice was shaking slightly. A human male jogged over to them. He was dripping wet, and his smile was so wide it seemed to split his face in half. His hair was dark and plastered to his head, and he wore almost nothing, just a small piece of cloth around his waist. "Hey, you must be our visitors," he said cheerfully. "I'm Sam Miller. You guys want to try the diving boards? That high one up there is crazy. For just a second it feels like you're going to die. It's amazing." Al's translator must have made an error. "You seek the feeling of death for entertainment." "Yeah, man, the adrenaline rush is incredible. Nothing makes you feel more alive than almost dying." Sam laughed and slapped Al on the arm in a friendly way. The touch was startling. No one touched warriors uninvited and lived. "Come on, give it a try. The water's warm." Al looked at his team. They all wore the same expression of horrified confusion. He looked back at Sam Miller, still grinning, still dripping water, completely unaware that he had just touched a warrior who could end his life in a heartbeat. "We will observe," Al said carefully. They observed for the next 3 hours. In that time, they watched humans throw themselves from heights that would kill most species. They watched humans cheer when their friends performed complicated twists and flips during the fall. They watched humans encourage each other to jump from even higher platforms. One young human female climbed to the highest board in the entire facility. She stood at the edge, looking down at the water far below. The other humans fell silent, watching her. "Come on, Amy," someone shouted. "You can do it." The female named Amy took a deep breath. Then she jumped. She fell like a stone, spinning twice in the air before straightening her body into a perfect line. She hit the water cleanly, barely making a splash. When she surfaced, the entire room exploded in cheers. Amy swam to the edge of the pool, climbed out, and immediately ran back toward the ladder to do it again. "They are insane," one of the scouts muttered. Al said nothing. He was beginning to think the same thing. After the diving, Marsh appeared and offered to show them more recreational activities. She led them through the station with obvious pride, pointing out different areas where humans gathered to have fun. They passed a large room where humans were climbing walls. Not stairs, not ladders, but sheer vertical surfaces covered in small colored holds. The humans grabbed these holds with their bare hands and pulled themselves upward, their bodies dangling over empty space. "Is there a net below them?" Ra asked. "Some walls have mats," said. "Some don't. It depends on how hard you want to make it." "And when they fall?" "Then they fall," shrugged. "That's part of the fun, the risk makes it exciting." They moved on and found something even more disturbing. In a padded room, two humans faced each other wearing protective padding on their hands. At some signal Al did not see, they began to attack each other. They threw punches at each other's faces and bodies, ducking and weaving, grunting with effort. Blood began to flow from one human's nose. The other human's eye started to swell shut. "What crime did they commit?" Al demanded. "What is their punishment for?" Looked confused for a moment, then laughed. "Oh, this is boxing. It's a sport. They're friends. Friends do not beat each other until they bleed. Human friends do. It's how we test ourselves, how we get stronger." Watched the fight with obvious enjoyment. "There's nothing like a good sparring match between buddies." The fight ended when one human could no longer stand. The other human immediately helped him up and they embraced like brothers. They were both bleeding. They were both smiling. That evening, invited to something called movie night. She explained that humans would gather together to watch stories projected onto a large screen. Al thought this sounded harmless enough. He was wrong. The humans called the movie a horror film. For 2 hours, Al watched terrifying images flash across the screen. Monsters that killed without mercy. Humans dying in creative and gruesome ways. Psychological torture, gore, terror. And the humans loved it. They screamed at the scary parts, but they also laughed. They threw pieces of popped grain at the screen and made jokes about the deaths. When the monster killed another victim, some humans cheered. Others covered their eyes, peeking through their fingers, deliberately making themselves more afraid. Al sat rigid in his seat, unable to understand what he was witnessing. These creatures paid money to frighten themselves. They gathered in groups to experience terror together. They made jokes about death and found entertainment in suffering. When the movie ended, the humans discussed their favorite kills. They argued about which death scene was the most creative. A young human said he wished the monster had killed more people. "What did you think?" asked Al brightly. Al looked at her. This small human female who led a space station. This creature who had spent the last 2 hours watching simulated death and laughing. "I think," he said slowly, that there is something very wrong with your species. Just smiled. Wait until you see what we have planned for tomorrow. That night Al wrote his first report to Commander Hose. He tried to explain what he had witnessed: the voluntary falling, the combat between friends, the celebration of terror. His hands trembled as he wrote. He did not know how to explain any of it. 3 days into Recreation Week, Al was beginning to question everything he knew about the universe. The humans continued to surprise him in terrible ways. Each morning brought new horrors disguised as entertainment. Each night, he lay awake trying to understand how any species could survive with such self-destructive instincts. On the 4th day, Chief Engineer Ben Cooper approached the team with an invitation. He was a large human male with thick arms and a beard covering half his face. His eyes crinkled when he smiled, which was constantly. "We're doing a camping trip in the today," Ben said. "You should come. Great chance to see humanity in our natural element." Al had studied the stations. It was a massive section of Shadow Station 7 designed to simulate a wild environment from Earth. Trees grew there. Water flowed through streams and rivers. Animals lived and hunted inside its boundaries. It was meant to give humans a taste of their home world. "What is camping?" Ra asked suspiciously. "We go into the wilderness and live there for a while. Build shelters, make fires, cook food over open flames. You know, basic survival stuff." Ben said this as if it were the most normal thing in the universe. "It's how humans used to live all the time before we built cities." "Why would you choose to do this when you have shelter and technology available?" Ben laughed. "Because it's fun. There's something about being out in nature, away from all the machines and screens, makes you feel alive." That word again, fun. Al was beginning to hate that word. Against his better judgment, he agreed to join the camping trip. He told himself it was for research. He needed to observe human behavior in different settings. Commander Hose would want a complete report. There was even more impressive than the report suggested. When the doors opened, Al stepped into a forest. Real trees rose around him, their branches blocking out the artificial sky above. The air smelled different here, thick with the scent of growing things and decaying leaves. Somewhere in the distance, water rushed over rocks. Sounds came from everywhere. Birds called to each other in the branches. Insects hummed in the underbrush. Something larger moved through the trees far away, its footsteps heavy on the ground. "There are predators in here," Al stated. "Oh yeah," said Lisa Park, a navigation officer with long black hair and a constant smile. She was busy sharpening a primitive blade against a stone. "Bears, wolves, mountain lions. The ecosystem needs predators to stay healthy. And you enter this place willingly, for entertainment." "Absolutely, nothing like the great outdoors." The humans began making camp near a small clearing. Al watched them work with growing unease. They gathered dead plant material and constructed crude shelters from branches and leaves. They collected stones and arranged them in circles. Then Ben Cooper knelt beside a pile of dry wood and began making fire. Not with a plasma torch, not with any kind of technology. He rubbed pieces of wood together until friction created heat. Smoke began to rise. Small flames appeared. Ben blew gently on the flames, feeding them air, until a proper fire crackled in the stone circle. "There we go," Ben said with satisfaction. "Who's hungry?" The humans cooked their food over the open flames. They stuck pieces of meat on sharpened sticks and held them over the fire, turning them slowly. Fat dripped into the flames and sizzled. The smell of cooking meat filled the air. "This is insane," Ra whispered to Al. "They have food synthesis technology. They have climate-controlled quarters. Yet they choose to sleep on the ground and cook over fire like primitives." "I believe that is the point," Al replied quietly. "They are practicing survival, training themselves for hardship." As darkness fell over the humans gathered around the fire. The flames threw dancing shadows across their faces. The sounds of the forest grew louder in the night, full of hunting calls and rustling movements. Then the humans began telling stories. At first, Al did not understand what was happening. A human female named started speaking in a low voice about a creature that lived in the woods. Her voice grew softer and more tense as she described how the creature hunted humans in the darkness, how it made no sound until it was right behind you, how its victims were never found. The other humans leaned closer, their eyes wide. Some of them glanced nervously at the dark trees surrounding the camp. They were frightening each other on purpose. More stories followed, tales of ghosts that haunted old houses, stories of killers who hid in the shadows, legends of monsters that stole children in the night. Each storyteller tried to be more terrifying than the last. The children were the worst part. Yes, the humans had brought children on this trip, young ones not yet fully grown, with soft faces and high voices. These children sat among the adults and listened to the horror stories with obvious delight. When the scary parts came, they squealed and grabbed each other. They begged for more. "You are traumatizing your young," Al said. He could not stop himself. Ben Cooper looked up from the fire, surprised. "What? No, this is tradition. Scary stories around the campfire. Every kid loves it." "You are teaching them to fear." "We're teaching them to face fear." Ben's voice was gentle but firm. "Fear is part of life. Better to learn how to handle it when you're young, in a safe environment, than to face it for the first time as an adult." Al had no response to this. The next morning, the humans engaged in something called mountain biking. It contained a range of artificial hills with steep, rocky paths carved into their sides. The humans rode small two-wheeled vehicles down these paths at incredible speeds. Al watched a young male named Tyler Grant approach the steepest hill. Tyler grinned at his friends, pushed off, and began his descent. The bike rattled and jumped over rocks. Tyler's body twisted as he tried to maintain control. He was going far too fast. The crash was spectacular. Tyler's front wheel hit a large stone and the bike stopped dead. Tyler did not stop. He flew over the handlebars and tumbled across the rocky ground, rolling and bouncing like a thrown doll. When he finally came to rest, he lay still for a moment. Then he jumped to his feet, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and threw his arms in the air. "That was sick," he shouted. "Did you see that wipeout?" His friends cheered. They actually cheered. Tyler examined his injuries with obvious pride. Deep scrapes covered his arms and legs. Blood ran down his shin. One of his elbows was already swelling. "That's going to leave some awesome scars," Lisa said approvingly. Tyler nodded happily and went to retrieve his bike for another run. Al turned away. He could not watch anymore. These humans were not just strange. They were not just different. They were something else entirely, something they had never encountered in all their conquests. They were beings who had turned survival itself into a game, who had made fear into entertainment, who had learned to laugh at pain and celebrate danger. And somewhere deep in his warrior's heart, Al felt the first true stirrings of real terror. The final 2 days of Recreation Week brought something the humans called a festival. Al had seen enough by this point. His reports to Commander Hose had grown longer and more disturbed with each passing day. He had documented the diving, the fighting, the horror films, the camping, the dangerous riding. He had written about children being taught to embrace fear. He had described humans cheering for injuries and celebrating near-death experiences. But he was not prepared for what came next. Marsh found him in his quarters on the morning of the 6th day. Her smile was brighter than usual, which worried him. "Tonight is the big festival," she announced. "The whole station is going to be there. Music, dancing, food, drinks. It's the highlight of Recreation Week." "I have seen enough human recreation," Al said carefully. "Oh, come on, you can't miss this. It's where we really let loose." grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. He could have resisted. He could have broken her grip without thinking. But some part of him needed to see how much worse things could get. The festival was held in the station's largest recreational bay. Normally, this space was used for exercise and sports. Tonight, it had been transformed into something Al could not quite understand. The lights had been changed. Instead of the normal white glow, colored beams swept across the room in chaotic patterns. Red, blue, green, purple lights flashed and spun, creating a dizzying visual storm. Fog rose from machines on the floor, making everything hazy and dreamlike. And the noise. The noise hit Al like a physical force. The humans called it music, but it was nothing like any music he had encountered before. Deep bass tones shook the floor beneath his feet. Rhythmic beats pounded against his skull. Electronic sounds screamed and wailed and crashed together in patterns that seemed designed to overwhelm the senses. Hundreds of humans filled the space. They were packed together, body against body, moving in ways that description. Some threw their arms in the air and jumped in time with the beat. Others twisted and writhed like creatures in pain. Some pressed close together in pairs, their bodies grinding against each other. "This is a dance party," shouted over the noise. "Let loose, have fun." Al could barely hear her. He stood at the edge of the chaos, trying to process what he was seeing. His team gathered around him, their scales rippling with distress. "They are deliberately damaging their hearing," Ross said. She had to put her mouth near Al's ear just to be heard. "They are deliberately damaging everything," Al replied. He watched a human approach a table covered in containers of liquid. The human poured several different liquids into a single cup and drank it quickly. Then he poured another and drank that too. Al recognized the behavior. The human was consuming substances that would impair his mind and body. Many humans were doing this. They drank the liquids and then returned to the dancing floor, their movements becoming looser and more uncoordinated. They stumbled, they laughed, they fell into each other. "They are poisoning themselves," one of the scouts said. "Yes," Al agreed, "they are." As the night went on, the chaos intensified. The music grew louder, the lights flashed faster, the humans became more wild. Al witnessed something that stopped his heart. In the center of the room, a group of humans had formed a circle. Inside the circle, humans were throwing themselves at each other with full force. They crashed together, bounced apart, and crashed together again. They called it moshing. It looked like combat, it looked like war. Al watched a human male take a shoulder to the face and go down hard. He waited for the violence to escalate. He waited for weapons to appear. Instead, the humans around the fallen one immediately reached down and pulled him back to his feet. They patted his back. They checked if he was hurt. Then they pushed him back into the circle to do it again. "They are simulating battle," Ra said. Her voice was flat with shock. "They are practicing war for entertainment." A human female was lifted above the crowd. She lay on her back on top of dozens of reaching hands, and the crowd passed her along, moving her body from one end of the room to the other. She was laughing the entire time. She was completely vulnerable, completely helpless, and completely trusting that the strangers beneath her would not drop her. Ra could not take any more. The sub-commander turned and pushed her way through the crowd toward the exits. Al wanted to follow her, but his duty demanded he stay and observe. He needed to document everything. He found Ra later on a quiet observation deck far from the festival. She stood at the window, her scales pale, staring out at the stars. The silence was a relief after the overwhelming noise. A human was already there. He sat on a bench near the window, also watching the stars. He was young, with dark hair and calm eyes. When they approached, he nodded in greeting. "Not a fan of the party?" he asked. "It was too much," Ra said. "The noise, the chaos, the violence disguised as celebration." The human smiled. "Yeah, it's not for everyone. I'm Chris, medical officer." "You do not participate in the festival." Not really my scene. Chris stretched his legs out in front of him. I get my excitement other ways. What ways? Al asked. Skydiving mostly. I do not know this word. Chris turned to look at them. His expression was casual, almost bored. It's simple. You go up in an aircraft, then you jump out. No ship around you, just your body and the atmosphere. You fall for a while, really fast. Then you open a fabric sheet called a parachute to slow down before you hit the ground. Ra's claws gripped the window frame. What happens if the fabric does not open? Then you hit the ground at terminal velocity and die. The silence stretched between them. The stars continued their slow spin outside the window. How often does this happen? Al asked quietly. Often enough to make it interesting. Chris smiled again. That's the whole point. The risk is what makes it feel real. When you're falling through the sky with nothing but a pack on your back, knowing that your life depends on a piece of fabric opening at the right moment, everything else falls away. All your problems, all your worries. Nothing matters except that moment. You risk death to escape your worries, Ra said. I risk death to feel alive. There it was again. That same phrase. The same madness expressed in the same words by different humans. Chris stood up and stretched. Anyway, I should get some sleep. Early shift tomorrow. You two should try to enjoy the rest of Recreation Week. Tomorrow is the last day. I hear they're setting up a haunted house. He walked away, leaving the two alone with the stars. Ra turned to Al. Her eyes were haunted. Lieutenant, she said slowly, I have fought beside you in a dozen campaigns. I have faced death without flinching. I have killed enemies who outnumbered us 10-1. I know. I'm afraid of these humans. Al looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond them, Commander Hose waited for a report that would tell him humans were weak. That invasion would be easy. That the Empire would add another world to its collection. I am too, Al admitted. They stood there in silence as the distant sounds of the festival continued to pulse through the station walls. Commander Hose sat alone in his private chambers aboard the Endless Fang. The data pad containing Al's final report lay on the table before him. He had read it 3 times already. Each reading left him more disturbed than the last. Each reading pushed him further toward a conclusion he did not want to accept. He had expected to receive information about human weaknesses. He had expected tactical data about their military capabilities, their defensive systems, their vulnerability to weapons. He had expected Al to return with a detailed invasion plan. Instead, he had received this. Hose picked up the data pad and read the summary once more. The humans engaged in voluntary falling from extreme heights. They called it diving. They built towers specifically for the purpose of jumping from them. They celebrated the sensation of almost dying. The humans fought each other as entertainment. They called it boxing or martial arts. They struck each other until blood flowed, then embraced as friends. They gave awards to those who were best at inflicting damage. The humans subjected themselves to simulated terror. They called them horror films or haunted houses. They paid money to be frightened. They sought out experiences that triggered their deepest fears and then laughed about them afterward. The humans entered dangerous wilderness voluntarily. They called it camping or hiking. They slept on the ground surrounded by predators. They started fires with primitive tools. They taught their children to embrace fear through stories of monsters and death. The humans threw themselves down mountains on unstable vehicles. They called it mountain biking or skiing. They celebrated crashes and displayed their injuries with pride. They viewed scars as trophies. The humans poisoned themselves with fermented substances and subjected their bodies to deafening noise. They called it partying. They gathered in large groups to damage their hearing, impair their minds, and throw themselves at each other in simulated combat they called dancing. The humans jumped from aircraft without protection. They called it skydiving or base jumping. They trusted their lives to thin fabric and enjoyed the possibility of death. Hose set down the datapad. A knock came at his door. He knew who it was. "Enter." Lieutenant Al walked in and stood at attention. He looked different than when he had left. His scales had lost some of their luster. His eyes had a haunted quality that Hose had never seen in them before. "Lieutenant, your report was thorough." "Yes, Commander. I would like to hear your conclusions, in your own words." Al was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and controlled. "Commander, we have conquered species across 17 star systems. We have faced armies and armadas and weapons of terrible destruction. We have hunted prey across burning worlds and frozen moons. We fear nothing." He paused. "But I have never encountered a species like this." Hose waited. "They do not fear death," Al continued. "I thought at first they were simply foolish, that they did not understand danger, but I was wrong. They understand danger perfectly. They study it. They measure it. They calculate the exact probability of dying from any given activity. And then they do it anyway, for fun." Al began to pace, unable to stand still. "Their children are raised to embrace terror. From their earliest years, they are exposed to frightening stories, dangerous games, and physical challenges that push their bodies to the limit. By the time they reach adulthood, they have experienced more simulated death than most warriors face in real combat. Their recreation is indistinguishable from training," Hose said quietly. "Yes, Commander, that is exactly what it is. They train constantly. Every game they play, every sport they practice, every form of entertainment they consume is designed to prepare them for hardship, danger, and death. But they do not call it training. They call it fun. They call it recreation. They call it living." Al stopped packing and faced his commander directly. "If we invade Earth, we will not be fighting an army. We will be fighting an entire species that has spent its existence preparing for exactly this moment. Every human civilian is a survivor of self-imposed horrors we cannot imagine. They have trained their bodies to endure pain. They have trained their minds to function under terror. They have trained their spirits to laugh in the face of death. Surely they will break under real combat," Hose said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Commander, I watched a human child, no more than 8 cycles old, tell a story about a monster that ate people alive. The child was smiling. The other children laughed. When the story was over, they begged for more." Al's voice dropped to a whisper. "These people turned death into entertainment for their children. What do you think they will do when we give them a real enemy to fight? What do you think they will feel when they face real danger instead of simulated danger?" Hose knew the answer. He had known it since he first read the report. "They will enjoy it." "Yes, Commander. They will treat our invasion as the greatest game their species has ever played. They will not surrender. They will not break. They will fight with joy in their hearts and smiles on their faces. And when it is over, the survivors will tell stories about it around campfires and laugh." The 2 warriors stood in silence. Finally, Hose spoke. "Your recommendation, Lieutenant." Al's answer came without hesitation. "Withdraw immediately. Mark the Sol system as a restricted zone. Warn all vessels to avoid human space. And never, under any circumstances, give these people a reason to seek us out." Hose turned to look out his window at the distant blue dot of Earth. Such a small world. Such a tiny speck in the vastness of space. Such terrifying creatures living upon it. "Navigation," he said into his communicator. "Set course away from the Sol system. Maximum speed." A confused voice responded. "Commander, our orders from the High Council were to prepare for invasion. They are expecting your report." "I will explain to the Council personally." Hose turned from the window. "There are some species that were never meant to conquer." The Endless Fang turned away from Earth and engaged its fastest engines. Within moments, The ship had vanished into the void between stars, fleeing from a planet of soft-skinned, flat-toothed creatures who had somehow become more frightening than any enemy they had ever faced. Behind them, aboard Shadow Station 7, Recreation Week was ending. Marsh stood in the main recreation bay, tablet in hand, already planning the next month's activities. Around her, humans were cleaning up from the festival, laughing and joking about their favorite moments. "Okay, everyone," announced. "Recreation Week is officially over. Great job this year. I think we really showed our visitors a good time." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Now, I know some of you have already been asking about next month. I've got some ideas." She scrolled through her tablet. "We're thinking about an extreme obstacle course maybe a station-wide paintball tournament. Oh, and someone suggested we try zero-gravity wrestling." The humans cheered. "Sounds like we're going to have some fun," said. And somewhere in the darkness of space, moving away from Earth as fast as its engines could carry it, Commander Hose heard that word echo in his mind. "Fun." He shuddered and ordered his navigator to increase speed.